This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burr. Thanks for joining us. We start with developing news. An evacuation order has been issued for rural properties outside Grand Forks near the U.S.-BC border due to a wildfire. The regional district of Kootenay Boundary says nearly 300 properties in our province are impacted by this evacuation notice. In a tweet by the Emergency Operations Centre, it says no structures have been lost due to the blaze so far. Let's get more now.
Right now, it's a very dynamic situation. Tactical evacuations have taken place in a number of areas. So the main fire front, to my knowledge, has not crossed the border. There is spotting ember showers that are happening in the area, starting small spot fires that the fire department is actioning.
Evacuees are now asked to go to the Red Cross Reception Center at the Grand Forks Arena, and at least a portion of Highway 3 will be closed. We'll bring you any updates on this wildfire later in the show. The BC NDP is promising more help for middle-income families looking to enter the housing market. Leader David Eby has unveiled a plan where the government would finance 40% of the price for people buying their first home. But as Mira Baines explains, there are worries that pledge could be abused.
BC NDP leader David Eby stood outside a townhouse complex in the pouring rain to tout his plan to make home ownership more achievable for families trying to buy their first home.
A benefit of this plan means that people will be able to buy with a smaller down payment. Their monthly payments will be lower and will be affordable, and taxpayers will be protected.
The idea is that government financing and low-cost land would allow buyers to purchase units 40% below market price. Buyers would still need to qualify for a mortgage for 60% of the value. In turn, the province would register a second mortgage for the remaining 40%. Later, if the owner sells the unit, the province would get 40% of the appreciation in the value of the home. The BC NDP says the plan will help 5,000 middle-income people a year for 5 years. The price tag is $1.29 billion.
This program isn't going to meet the needs of every British Columbian. There'll be very strict asset rules, income rules for people to qualify who might not otherwise be able to get into the housing market.
The party says the government would partner with nonprofits, local government, First Nations, and non-market housing providers to buy land and contribute to projects. The director of the City program at Simon Fraser University says the devil is in the details.
The question will be how these policies will be implemented, and also how will transparency be enforced. As we've seen with additional stories coming from the CBC, the enforcement, the implementation of these policies are also up for abuse.
In March of last year, it came to light in a lawsuit that more than a dozen people, including a real estate agent, allegedly abused a government program meant to help middle-income families find affordable housing. At least 13 people allegedly lied to get a crack at below-market price units in a Victoria condominium building.
The BC NDP's home ownership plan is just one of a suite of policies it says is aimed at delivering 300,000 middle-class homes over the next decade. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
The BC Green Party, meanwhile, is renewing its commitment to the carbon tax. It says if it's elected, it will increase carbon rebate checks, eliminate compliance loopholes, and make sure big polluters pay more. Leader Sonia Furstenau says the plan would put more money in people's pockets and help communities invest in climate resiliency.
In 2021, we saw that cost from the atmospheric river, the heat dome, the fires, and that the estimated cost to BC's economy that year was up to $17 billion.
Political leaders at both federal and provincial levels have distanced themselves from carbon pricing in recent months, citing affordability and possible impacts on the economy. Furstenau says under the Greens, the tax system would become more fair, transparent, and predictable. John Rustad, meanwhile, had a quiet day on the campaign trail with no scheduled events. We will have a longer profile on the BC Conservative Party leader later in the newscast. On the island, the riding of Nanaimo is being redrawn. It's been held by the NDP since 2005, but is now split in two, Nanaimo-Lanцeville to the north and Nanaimo-Gabriola Island to the south. We took a rainy walk in the city to ask voters what their priorities are.
What I see in the world around me in our country, I'm just seeing a lot of people struggling financially right now.
Cost of living for sure. I feel like a lot of my friends, people my age, were struggling in that area, and it would be nice to just see that relief a little bit more for sure.
I think my number one concern is looking to the future for our grandchildren. So climate change is a big concern. Second to that is inflation and what it's doing to our fixed incomes and our savings. And thirdly is how can we help as we age out of volunteerism?
For me, it's looking getting some program sorted out for these homeless people who are everywhere in every city downtown, and there's words about finding suitable housing for them, suitable care for them. I wish something would be positively done for these people.
A little bit too much infighting or backstabbing, I guess, for lack of a better name. I'd like to see more sticking to the issues.
Right now, mostly childcare. I'm a single mom. I work full-time. I'm a full-time student, and I don't have any childcare. It's expensive. It's hard to find.
Crime seems to be a bit of an issue. It does seem to be picking up more. And then people's public safety, but I think that might tie into getting people mental health. So people that are feeling unstable aren't lashing out and possibly attacking somebody. We've had murders downtown Nanaimo here that were very gruesome, and I don't think that Nanaimo is the same city that I grew up in when I was a little boy here back in the 90s.
Mounties are showing off several seizures of drugs and cash in 2 local cities after officers busted what they believe to be organized drug trafficking operations. Burnaby RCMP say 2 men and 2 women between the ages of 21 and 24 face a combined 28 drug charges, as well as guns, after a year-long probe. Police say they uncovered nearly a kilo of illicit fentanyl, meth, and cocaine. And in Surrey, police showed off what they seized: guns, drugs, and explosives from a home that was identified as a problem residence in the spring. A search warrant was executed in August and led to the arrest of 12 people. A second search warrant was done on a different property, where police say they found more weapons as well as drugs. They haven't confirmed whether these seizures in Burnaby and Surrey are believed to be part of the same drug trafficking ring. Amid safety concerns and open drug use in Gastown, Vancouver's mayor is working with police to open a community policing center. As Karis Hogg reports, the news is being welcomed by residents and some business owners.
Walking down Water Street in the heart of Gastown, these pedestrians say they feel safe.
We've been here several times. We feel perfectly safe. It's very sad to see the drug addicts, but we've got to remember they're somebody's son and daughters, and we haven't been
bothered with them, so no. Do you find Gastown safe, like when you're down here?
I think it's okay.
But some people who live and work in Gastown feel differently.
My car broke down 3 times on the EG parking lot 31, basically breaking every month.
Now we have people breaking into our building.
Into our building and stuff, so yeah, it's a concern.
Because they're homeless.
So, the cops are doing what they can do down here, but they can't be everywhere at once. Okay, so if they had more police presence, that would be really good.
That's exactly what is being promised by Mayor Ken Sim and the Vancouver Police Department, in the form of a new community policing center for the neighborhood and increased police presence in the area.
Until it gets up and running, we are going to add more officers to have more of a presence down there to help as we wait for longer-term solutions that actually get to the root cause of these challenges that we have.
The move is being welcomed by the local Business Improvement Society, and the executive director hopes it will incorporate more wraparound services like mental health supports. David Jones owns Vinyl Records on Water Street and thinks policing is important as long as they're trained properly.
I think what's more important is that you have trained security in understanding drug addiction and things like that. So the way they act helps teach me and how to deal with these situations.
No timeline has been shared for an opening of the new policing center. Karis Hogg, CBC News, Vancouver.
The woman who alleges she was raped by musician Jacob Hogard was cross-examined by his defense lawyer earlier in the day, but not before she gave more details of what she says happened in a Northern Ontario motel room in 2016. Here's Thomas Dagla with what the jury heard and a warning: some of it may be disturbing.
In the early hours of June 25, 2016, a woman says she was led down a motel hallway, following Jacob Hogard into his room for what she says she expected would be a casual chat. Now in court, the complainant spent the day testifying about what happened next, sometimes fighting back tears, always avoiding eye contact with her alleged attacker watching on. "He bent me over the bed," she recounted. "He pulled his pants down," later testifying that he raped her. "I didn't consent to that," she said. At Hogard's trial in northeastern Ontario, the issue of consent is key. The 40-year-old former Headley frontman is charged with 1 count of sexual assault, which he denies.
It's not for the defense to prove that it was consensual, it's for the Crown to prove that it wasn't. So that's going to be the burden on the Crown.
The woman, who can't be named, was 19 when she says she attended this Headley concert, meeting the singer later at an outdoor after-party behind the motel. She told court he held up his phone, took pictures of her, and demanded she say her age out loud. Later, on the bed, she says Hogard choked her, imitated pig sounds, and called the woman dirty little piggy. She testified that when she took a shower after the assault, he followed her and urinated on her. The woman recounted once it was all over, "He says that I don't have to worry about STDs or AIDS because he picks them young." Hogard's defense lawyer Megan Savard began her cross-examination by focusing on the limits of the complainant's memory. The lawyer suggested to her memory fades over time, but the woman said she only wishes she could forget what happened to her that day. Hogard's trial continues on Thursday. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
First Nations in the Fraser Valley are finding thousands of fish dead in the Hope Slough waterway near Chilliwack. They say the reason is a large spill. Community members from the Cheam and Squaw First Nations discovered the spill on Monday and found juvenile salmon and endangered sailor sucker among the dead animals. They say this spill could possibly wipe out a year's worth of coho spawn. The Cheam say the spill may be linked to agriculture and farming activities upstream.
I almost broke out in tears because I could see a dead coho, the little ones that were all lined up along the bank here, and it's very sad for us because we consider ourselves as salmon people. We consider them as our relatives.
The community say they've been trying to restore the salmon stocks and clean up the waterway for many years. Fall storm season is set to begin in our province, and BC Hydro is warning power outages could be more frequent and more widespread this autumn. Not because of wind and rain, though. Michelle Gassoub has more on the impact that a multi-year drought could have on our infrastructure.
Just like that, it's a return to rainy season. And with fall storms around the corner, there's a warning from BC Hydro. Not about this rain, but about the drought.
It's continuing to put local vegetation under stress, so damaging roots, trees, and soil in many parts of the province.
A report from the utility is warning people across BC to brace for widespread power outages in the days and weeks ahead. It comes as a series of atmospheric rivers are set to hit the province.
So trees weakened by years of drought can be more susceptible to wind and stormy weather, and could be at risk of falling over into our infrastructure, contributing to power outages. So we do have in-house meteorologists, and they're warning about this elevated risk of power outages in the event of a windstorm this fall.
According to Hydro, Vancouver Island and northern BC are at the highest risk. A statement from the Vancouver Park Board says it doesn't anticipate drought conditions will impact trees' ability to survive storms here. But the city of North Vancouver says it's actively monitoring trees and removing those that could come down.
Our arborists have been out in the field and they've been going around and checking the trees and assessing them. And we've started on a mitigation program. So we look at options to retain trees wherever possible, but if need be, we do have to remove some, and currently that program's in effect.
A quick transition from drought to rain can also increase the risk of flooding, but those rainy conditions that helped weaken wildfires over the summer are also likely to ease some of the risk now.
This year was a little bit unique, though. It was a drought partly because of the low snowpack, but we did have some precipitation events in July and August. So it wasn't to say that it's been bone dry compared to several other years last year or 2022 as well. The worst case scenario is actually just having storm after storm after storm.
A reminder that the impacts of a hot, dry summer are felt well into the fall. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Let's bring in Darius Mahdavi for our first look at the weather and some significant lightning strikes you're tracking.
Yes, many thunderstorms. This is very late in the season for this sort of magnitude of convective activity, this many thunderstorms. We're going to continue to see those throughout the evening tonight. We have a wind warning down in the southeast where some places are seeing wind gusts up to 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. In some places even higher than that. And then these thunderstorms that continue to pass through the interior. Now, over the last few hours, we've seen them in places like Kelowna and Kamloops and continuing to work their way further north. Prince George also got a strike that knocked out some power. We actually have some footage from Kelowna. Take a look here. You can see just how bad some of those winds were along with these storms moving the crane. Very heavy rainfall as well. Many downpours associated with these storms. So we're expecting to see situations like this throughout the evening, but things will start to taper off as we start to cool down throughout the night. Now, I also want to highlight, in addition to those heavy rains that are coming to many areas, what's happening over on the coast, because we have, again, this atmospheric river that was feeding into the central coast, making its way down. We're not getting the worst of it by any means. The rain here, although heavy at times, is not going to near the rainfall totals up on the central and northern coasts. But with that being said, as this continues to work its way down, expect to see some rain start to taper off as we get later into the evening here in Vancouver. For most of the island, it's already cleared out. But there is some more moisture coming on the way, pretty much down to the coast. Expect to see tomorrow some very, very strong winds up on the central coast in the North Island. And we'll talk more about that later this hour. Dan?
Okay, Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
As the province heads to the polls next month, the BC Conservative Party leader is sharing how he would tackle BC's biggest problems. An up-close look at John Rustad after this. With the provincial election campaign now underway, candidates from numerous parties showed up to a Surrey seniors' home to debate the role of government in supporting seniors' care. Our Maurice Katz spoke with residents after the debate.
With the election heating up, candidates from all parties are making their case to seniors. We're here to find out what matters most to them. What issue matters most to you?
I would like more effort put forward to try and eliminate or at least significantly reduce the deaths from drugs. These young people have a future, and they're ending up on the street. And that's a sad, sad situation, and it's not easily addressed.
I think the shortage of affordable housing, either for seniors or for people that are on low income, is a big issue.
There needs to be something in place so that senior citizens in particular, and those who are marginalized in some way, have a safe place to land rather than having the fear of being evicted and ending up on the street.
I'm upset with the Conservatives saying about not immunizing against COVID. 70% of the population in this units would have been dead without it. So that I can't support. So I'm really undecided at this point.
My biggest fear is that if for some reason my husband and I are separated because of health issues, is to be able to stay close. Not like somebody else that I know living here, and her husband's in White Rock and she's traveling back and forth every day to go and see him.
These issues are important to seniors, but they should be important to others as well, yes, other voters, because we're all going to become seniors one day.
If we take care of our seniors now, then when we get there, or when you get there, I should say, because I'm already there, there will be a safety net in place for you.
BC Conservative leader John Rustad has taken the party from no seats in the legislature to neck and neck with the BC NDP in recent polls. But in order to become premier, the rural politician needs to win seats in Metro Vancouver and Vancouver Island. Mira Baines reports on how he plans to do that.
John Rustad is a small-town guy with big ambition. Born and raised in Prince George, his start in politics came after being faced with a decision on whether to leave BC and relocate his forestry-based consulting business to Calgary.
And I thought, no, I don't want to have to leave British Columbia. And that left me with two options. I either just live with it or I had to get involved and try to change it.
He likes to connect with people one-on-one, volunteering to take photos for strangers.
Ultimately, what it came down to was the fact that you could actually help people.
John Rustad.
Rustad, who is MLA for Nechako Lakes in northern BC, is a former Minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation under Christy Clark. Now he's on a bigger stage. Will his plain talk and rural roots translate to votes? He's had a meteoric rise in a few months. 2 years ago, Rustad was kicked out of the BC Liberals, now BC United, by leader Kevin Falcon after social media posts questioning climate science. Unfazed, he found a new political home, joining the BC Conservatives and becoming the party's leader. An idea that was discussed more than 20 years ago with former caucus colleague and BC Liberal cabinet minister Bill Bennett, who described him as an out-of-the-box thinker.
We did have a conversation about our frustrations with the BC Liberal Party and whether one of us might someday end up, with the BC Conservatives and might even end up as leader.
Since becoming leader last year, Rustad has been galvanizing the right and fast. As the sole BC Conservative in the House, he attracted more MLAs from his old party and support. Then a major shift, a deal with BC United. Leader Kevin Falcon agreed to suspend its campaign after an agreement with Rustad.
This is the right thing for us as a party.
Rustad is resourceful. He's putting his message out through the airwaves. Rustad has been interviewed by polarizing psychologist Jordan Peterson. There are questions over who his advisors are behind the scenes and whether his position on some issues is too extreme.
Everyone was kind of wondering, well, who is whispering in John's ear? I understand he's got a couple of young men who he trusts,
Here, Rustad is shaking hands with Vancouver is Dying filmmaker Aaron Gunn, who is running for the federal Conservatives, and posing with federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Still, Rustad says his #1 advisor is his wife Kim, who he met at a theatre production and married in 1995. Still, to win, the BC Conservatives need to crack riding-rich Metro Vancouver, including Surrey and Vancouver Island. A political strategist says the key is engaging young voters.
If the Conservatives can attract this younger demographic, that this is their path to victory.
In Surrey, he's been aligning on initiatives by Mayor Brenda Locke, who has been at odds with the BC government over policing.
Brenda and I have had numerous conversations about things. I think she wants to see what's best for Surrey, and certainly Surrey is a huge focus for us.
Away from the crowds, his pet gray parrot at his home near Vanderhoof keeps him grounded. But those moments will be harder to find as Election Day approaches. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
To some people, it seems kids are growing up faster than ever, but that is not the case, say researchers studying puberty in humans, prehistoric ones. They were able to determine that humans living in the Ice Age went through puberty at the same age teenagers do today by studying the few known skeletons of long-dead adolescents. Here to walk us through this is our science specialist, Darius Badavi. Darius, these skeletons, they don't have acne or body odor that we know of. How can we tell if they were going through puberty?
Well, it's not easy. A skeleton doesn't have peach fuzz or voice cracks either, Dan. But a new method developed by one of the paper's authors, Mary Lewis at the University of Reading, can show us that can let us figure out where someone was in the process of puberty by looking at their skeleton. Now, I spoke with April Knoll, one of the researchers, who gave the example of that stage where a teenager just suddenly shoots up. It comes along with a change in the elbow, but she says that can tell you a whole lot more as well.
We know it's also the time when girls start to develop breasts and boys are going through that super awkward phase of having their voices break and all of those things, all the things that we remember, like possibly with horror. So when we see those kinds of changes in our Ice Age teens, we can infer all the other stuff that goes along with it.
So Darius, how many skeletons were they able to look at?
Right, so it's a great point. Knoll said that digging through the literature to find skeletons that were the right age from the right time period and complete enough to study was quite the challenge. In the end, they were able to track down 13 skeletons that fit all of the criteria and go to the museums and get their hands on them, only to find that 2 of them had been largely destroyed by a bombing in World War II. So 11 in total, and just listen to Knoll describe what it was like to study them.
That was the most exciting thing I've ever done. It was like we just did this tour of teenage skeletons. So it brought us to Italy and Monaco and the Czech Republic. We got to see some of the most famous skeletons in the world, including a young man with dwarfism. He's the oldest example of someone with dwarfism. And walking into that museum and seeing him there was, a real highlight for us, a real privilege.
And after all that, Darius, what did the researchers conclude?
I think the biggest finding is that people in the Ice Age, 12 to 40,000 years ago, went through puberty in the same way that we do. People talk a lot about all the different things that are different from how things used to be done, how much faster children grow up. But as Knoll tells it, that finding represents something so much bigger.
For me, the most emotionally compelling and the most rewarding aspect of the research that we did is that we're able to give back the humanity of these people. We're able to reconstruct a little bit about the lives they led in ways that when I'm teaching my students about stone tools or animal bones or whatever, it really doesn't help them connect in the same way.
And I just want to leave you with one really fascinating inference that came from this work, sort of a blend of life history and evolutionary biology. Take a listen.
We found that stuff that drives us parents nuts about teenagers, this tendency to stay up all night and sleep until 2. I mean, with my son, that drove me out of my mind. But now we see that there's actually an evolutionary benefit in small groups to have one person awake at all times to make sure the group is safe. And so it's like teens are taking the night shift, and I love that.
So the next time you're getting annoyed with your teen for doing something that you just can't explain, just know it might be hardwired into them. And it might have kept your ancestors alive.
Good tip. Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Feisty moments on Parliament Hill ahead of a much-publicized vote of non-confidence. How a pre-vote debate between the Prime Minister and opposition leader erupted in fury. That and more after the break. The federal Liberals survived a vote in the House of Commons today that threatened to bring down the government. The Bloc Québécois and NDP voted against the non-confidence motion introduced by the Conservatives. As Kate McKenna shows us, just as the cost of survival for Justin Trudeau gets steeper, the heat is rising in Parliament. The words cutting, tempers seething.
Global crises on
minutes before a vote that could have triggered an election. Things got so heated, the Prime Minister risked getting himself thrown out of the House.
Standing up to bullies requires us to call them out on their crap sometimes.
Justin Trudeau using unparliamentary language, responding to Conservative comments he said were homophobic heckles.
I will happily withdraw my comment if the member who suggested that I was sharing a bathtub with Tom Clark
Conservatives say it was only a dig by their MP Garnet Janis at the cost of the tub in the new condo for Canada's Consul General in New York.
Let us presume the better natures of all members of Parliament.
Even after the Speaker regained control, there was no love lost between Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and Trudeau.
I will always stand up for Canada proudly.
Only he didn't stand up. He backed down.
Yes.
He's been backing down for 9 years.
All those in favor of the motion?
But the non-confidence vote triggered by the Conservatives failed. Thanks to the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. Now the Bloc is making clear what it wants in return for its support. The Bloc demanding 2 bills passed by October 29th to boost old age security pensions and protect Canada's supply management system for farmers.
What we are proposing is good for retired persons in Quebec, but also in Canada. It's good for milk and eggs and poultry product producer in Quebec, but also in Canada.
If not, the Bloc says it'll work with other parties to try to topple the Liberals.
I think every proposal that's made, is something that is considered. But I don't think it's helpful to issue ultimatums.
For now, the Liberals have successfully avoided an election, but a campaign must come sometime within the next year. And today's pointed and personal attacks in the House of Commons could be a preview of what it'll look like. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
The son of 2 Canadians living in Lebanon says they have been killed in an Israeli airstrike. Kamal Tubaja tells CBC News his 74-year-old father and 69-year-old mother are gone. It apparently happened in southern Lebanon during the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. The CBC's Chris Brown has the latest on the fighting.
Hezbollah unleashed one of its most fearsome weapons, targeting the Tel Aviv area with a ballistic missile that could have caused immense damage. The white streak in the sky appeared to be Israeli defenses shooting it down, but the fact it was launched at all is significant.
This is the first time in history that Hezbollah terrorists have fired at the city of Tel Aviv.
Hezbollah says it was aiming for the headquarters of Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, and it also fired smaller weapons at northern Israeli communities, wounding 3. Hezbollah has been badly hurt in recent days by Israeli airstrikes that have killed top commanders. Lebanon's health ministry says more than 600 people have been killed and there is chaos throughout the country. Israel says it's trying to force Hezbollah to abandon its support for Hamas so that tens of thousands of Israelis evacuated from northern Israel can return home. But Lebanon's health minister told CBC News that children and women make up most of the victims.
The vast majority, if not all, of the wounded who are being brought to hospitals are civilians.
Hospitals are buckling under the strain, and there are now more than 500,000 people who've been driven from their homes. Some have ended up at a school in Saida, Lebanon's 3rd largest city. We slept on the street for 2 days, said Sheen Hamoud, a mother of 2. This former Israeli intelligence officer says Hezbollah is under pressure to demonstrate its resilience despite its losses, which is why leader Hassan Nasrallah turned to one of its most deadly weapons.
He sent a signal to Israel when he launched one rocket, just signaling that Israel exaggerated and is still signaling that he is measured.
He says the message from Hezbollah may be that there is room for a political deal, which is what multiple reports suggest the U.S., France, and other countries are now urgently trying to broker, which could include Hamas in Gaza as well. Even so, there are indications that yet more escalation may come first. Israel's top military officer told reservists that their possible entry or a ground offensive into Lebanon may be imminent. Chris Brown, CBC News, Haifa.
More now on the Canadians killed in Lebanon and how their attempt to flee the fighting still ended in tragedy. Tonight, their son is sharing more on that painful sequence of events. Here's Ashley Burke.
As Israeli forces intensified their bombardment in southern Lebanon, a Canadian couple tried to escape by car, but they didn't make it.
Devastating.
I think the biggest, the ones that got the biggest impact are really my kids.
Kamal Tabaja says his father Hussein and mother Daud didn't want to leave their home in the south, but with airstrikes already underway, he urged them to escape while they still can.
I called my mom early in the morning. I told her, listen, you guys gotta leave.
He says as thousands tried to flee towards Beirut on Monday, his parents got stuck in that traffic and they lost contact.
There was a bombing that happened exactly around, I think, between 7 and 8 p.m. that day.
His brother later helped officials identify their burnt-out vehicle. His mother's watch found inside.
I guess it's just a shock.
He says his parents moved to Canada in 1996 to rebuild their lives after fleeing the Civil War. They raised their 6 children in Ottawa, but have lived in Lebanon the past 5 years.
They're people that sacrificed everything for others. They taught us this way. They always said, we should all appreciate Canada.
The Prime Minister offering his condolences.
Devastated by the loss of 2 Canadians, but the entire Lebanese people are suffering right now. We need to see both Israel and Hezbollah de-escalate.
But Tabaja says the government needs to do more.
Would you stop sending support to Israel? I mean, that should be voiced out.
For almost a year, the government has urged Canadians to get out of Lebanon. The Foreign Affairs Minister is again reiterating that advice, saying it's time to leave while commercial flights are still available as more airlines suspend service out of Beirut. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky made an impassioned speech at the United Nations General Assembly today. He told delegates no one wants Russia's war on his country to end more than Ukrainians. And as Chris Reyes reports, he again asked for help from the West to make that happen.
It's the Ukrainian people who feel the full pain of this war. It's Ukrainian children who are learning to distinguish the sounds of different types of artillery and drones because of Russia's war. It's our people who are forcefully separated by occupation because Putin decided he could do whatever he wants.
For the second year in a row since Russia invaded his country, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the United Nations General Assembly in person. He came with an urgent message.
Recently, I received yet another alarming report from our intelligence. Now Putin does seem to be planning attacks on our nuclear power plants and their infrastructure.
President Zelensky pleaded with the international community to uphold the UN Charter by continuing to support Ukraine's fight against Russia. He's been taking that message to various world leaders since arriving in the U.S. on Sunday. This week, he met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, presenting him with the Order of Freedom.
These are different, absolutely, parts of the world and various political ways of life, but they share the same understanding. Peace is needed, and it must be a real, just peace.
Zelensky's next meeting is with President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris to discuss his so-called victory plan, one that could include using U.S.-provided long-range missiles to strike deeper into Russia. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has issued a new warning that any attack on Russia supported by a nuclear power will be considered a joint aggression against his country.
President Zelensky heads to the White House on Thursday. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
A man convicted of murder more than 25 years ago has been executed in Missouri. As Nick Harper reports, it took place despite doubts about the integrity of his conviction and calls from the victim's family and prosecutor to spare his life.
Marcellus Williams was put to death by lethal injection just after 6 p.m. local time on Tuesday evening. It was the third time that he was scheduled to be executed. He received reprieves in 2015 and 2017.
No juror nor judge has ever found Williams' innocence claim to be credible. 2 decades of judicial proceedings and more than 15 judicial hearings upheld his guilty conviction.
There were multiple attempts this week to stay the execution. However, Missouri's governor, along with the state Supreme Court, rejected those appeals. and the US Supreme Court, here in Washington, said it would not intervene. Williams was found guilty of the murder of newspaper reporter Felicia Gale. She was killed inside her home in 1998. He always maintained he was innocent. What made this case unusual was that the prosecutor's office that brought the original murder conviction against him 21 years ago tried to block the execution. Concerns surrounded the reliability of the two main witnesses in the original trial, along with the fact that new testing showed Williams's DNA was not found on the murder weapon. In a written statement, the prosecution team said, if there is even the shadow of a doubt of innocence, the death penalty should never be an option.
The main person who would say the government did wrong and would know is Prosecutor Bell. That's his office today. And he looked back at what his office did, and he said, yes, my office messed up.
The family of the victim had also requested Williams's sentence be commuted to life in prison.
I've heard Governor Parson also say that he stands with victims' families and he does what the victims' families want. The victims' family doesn't want this.
This week it was reported that local people delivered thousands of signed petitions to the governor's office calling for clemency. Williams's son watched the execution. None of the victims' family were present. Nick Harper for CBC News, Washington.
And at 6:47, there's a live look at a rainy downtown Vancouver tonight. Darius will have your BC-wide weather forecast and an update on a hurricane in the Gulf Coast. Stay with us. Tropical storm Helene has become a hurricane, and it could hit the southern United States in the next day. It's now crossing the Gulf of Mexico after battering Cancun. It was still a tropical storm when it hit Mexico, but it's now gaining strength as it crosses the Gulf. Torrential rains are expected to further erode Cancun's beaches. In the southern U.S., meanwhile, sandbagging is underway, with officials declaring emergencies in Florida and Georgia. Authorities are predicting a life-threatening storm surge along the entire west coast of Florida. The storm is so large that hurricane conditions could be expected along 145 kilometers of the Georgia-Florida line, and rain as far north as Indiana. Let's bring back Darius Madabi, who has the live update on what's happening with Helene.
Right. So as you mentioned, Dan, it is continuing to move north. Right as it passed by Cancun, it strengthened from a tropical storm into a Category 1 hurricane. And if we zoom in here, you can see that circulation that is starting to gain over the last few hours. But if we take a look at the forecast track, you'll notice Category 1 hurricane now expected to rapidly strengthen to a Category 2 over just the next few hours, then into a Category 4 major hurricane. This is what we talked about yesterday, Dan, the fact that this was originally going to be a Category 3 major hurricane when it made landfall, but now it is continuing to be expected to strengthen even beyond that. This is rapid intensification. That's what we can expect. But also, moving very quickly as it moves inland, we can expect to see very widespread impacts inland as well. I also want to mention Hurricane John over in Mexico. We thought this was going to be the end of it earlier this week when it made landfall on Monday, but instead it has continued to pick up strength once again. If we take a look at the track here, you can see tropical storm now. Once again, it passed back into the ocean, picking up strength once again from those warm ocean waters, and is expected to make a second landfall just west of where it made landfall the first time. So another devastating event with a Category 1 hurricane for an area that has already been hit very hard. Now, let's turn our attention back here to BC. Lots of hurricane news, but also lots of excitement in the weather here in BC. Again, we have those very strong winds down in the southeast, not helping with the wildfire situation there. We also have those storms running through the interior, and soon to come, the winds on the coast. That is going to be the big story. You can see this big wave of precipitation. Along with it, some winds in some places gusting extremely high. And again, you can see that precipitation move in. Rain at times heavy for the west coast of the island in particular. But if we take a look at the winds, that might, if anything, be the bigger story. For some parts of the central and southern, the central coast, as well as the west coast of the island, even some places along the strait like Campbell River, we may see wind speeds in excess of 120 kilometers per hour in terms of those gusts, consistent wind speeds over 90 kilometers per hour. So definitely going to be a big story. Temperatures, not so much a big story, staying fairly consistently at or below seasonal across most of BC, although temperatures may start to recover as we get into early next week in the southern interior. Conditions across the province are a lot more calm tomorrow. Still some showers expected in parts of the central interior, but those storms seem to have cleared up unless you're on the coast, which are, again, very heavy rains, very strong winds in many places. Here in Vancouver, similar story. We've got that showery morning, that rainy afternoon, and into around midnight, very heavy rain at times, and then the sun is back out for Friday, Dan.
Okay, Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And stay with us. We will have an update on the wildfire near the BC-Washington border close to Grand Forks. It has prompted evacuation orders as well as alerts. More after this.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell. Here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Stream your favorite CBC dramas or comedies 24/7 on demand on the CBC Gem app. Plus, you can live stream CBC Vancouver News. Check it out at gem.cbc.ca. And never miss a special programming series or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver inbox and keep connected with us.
Let's go back to our top story now, an update on what is called the Goosemas wildfire outside Grand Forks near the BC-Washington border. Officials with the Regional District of Kootenay boundary warn the situation is, quote, very dynamic and does pose a threat to human life. The district's Emergency Operations Center says 156 residences are on evacuation order and 567 are on evacuation alert. Highway 3 is now closed between Highway 41 and Phoenix Road. Officials are asking evacuees to check in at the Red Cross Reception Center. That is at the Jack Goddard Memorial Arena in Grand Forks, and you're asked to check in after 7 p.m. The wildfire service says the blaze is estimated at 200 hectares. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, on YouTube, as well as our website, cbc.ca/BC. Janella Hamilton will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National, with the very latest on the wildfire near Grand Forks. So please join her then. Good night.